Hi everyone, it's quiet tonight, isn't it? I wonder where you are listening from right now, what time it is where you sit, settling into this calm moment to hear a story that is not full of adventure or dazzling magic, but of something far more human, something that tests the very limits of endurance. Imagine yourself in a city trapped by ice and war, a place where time itself seems heavy, where the streets are hushed except for the occasional crackle of distant gunfire, and yet life stubbornly continues. That city is Leningrad, and the time is the winter of 1941, when the world was consumed by a conflict so vast, and yet the details of survival could be intimate, close enough to almost touch, as ordinary people tried to exist in extraordinary circumstances. The air in Leningrad was sharp, bitter, and it crept into every corner, through cracks in windows, and under the poorly insulated doors of apartments that had lost most of their warmth. People learned to dress in layers of whatever clothing they could find, patched and repatched coats, scarves twisted around faces to keep the frostbite at bay. Food was a story in itself, a story of creativity and desperation that often made the stomach churn before it made it full. Black bread, mostly sawdust and flour, was the mainstay, rationed to barely a handful a day for those not working in critical sectors, while soup kitchens tried to stretch whatever thin broth they could offer, made from root vegetables or sometimes a meager mix of grains, nothing like the hearty meals one might imagine. Potatoes were treasured beyond measure, and even a single slice might be shared among family members with careful, almost ritual precision, each bite measured, chewed slowly, the act itself becoming a form of meditation in the midst of chaos. People had to find ways to keep moving, not just for survival, but to avoid the gnawing despair that crept in when hours dragged endlessly. The snow falling relentlessly outside, the gray sky pressing down on frozen rooftops. Some wandered the streets in search of firewood, any scraps of wood that could warm a stove or furnace, often risking German patrols or falling through ice along the frozen rivers. Children learned to entertain themselves with small games, spinning makeshift tops from scraps, sliding along icy streets, their laughter fragile, cutting through the solemnity like glass. Music sometimes drifted from windows where an old piano remained, its notes thin but comforting, a reminder that life had not completely abandoned the city. Rumors spread in whispers about deliveries of food or possible breaches in the siege, and though many were false, the hope they carried was vital, enough to spur someone to take a dangerous trip across a street lined with collapsed buildings or to risk frostbite for a chunk of bread from a distant bakery. Work was another strange rhythm of survival, whether it was people assigned to factories producing equipment or uniforms for soldiers, or volunteers shoveling snow and clearing debris from bombed streets, often without proper tools or clothing. Each day was a negotiation with reality, a careful balance between exertion and exhaustion, because too much labor without enough food could be deadly, yet sitting idle was not an option either. Stories circulated about those who had survived weeks with only a few bites of bread, their bodies astonishingly resilient, minds sharpening in ways that would be unimaginable under ordinary circumstances, the human spirit stretching beyond what it once thought possible. Some turned to scavenging, collecting scraps of paper for fuel, peels of potatoes for sustenance, even rags and old newspapers to patch clothing or insulate windows. And yet, there were moments of defiance, small acts that kept the city's heart beating. A baker might secretly slip a slice of bread to a neighbor. A mother would share what little she had with another child whose parents had fallen sick, and strangers would form bonds over shared warmth, huddling together in stairwells or basements to talk softly about life before the siege, weaving memories into the present to remind themselves that the world still existed beyond frostbitten walls. Humor became currency, in short jokes passed in whispers, absurd stories about the tiny victories over hunger or cold, the way someone had managed to trade a pair of gloves for a turnip, the audacity of finding a hidden cache of potatoes in a ruined cellar. As days turned into weeks, the monotony of struggle was punctuated by unpredictability. Air raids, sudden snowstorms, the freezing of the Neva River allowing risky crossings, and the arrival of supplies through the famed ice road, tenuous threads connecting the trapped city to the outside world. Letters from soldiers, if they arrived, were treasured, each word carrying the warmth of someone who had survived, even if just barely, the front lines. And through it all, the people of Leningrad moved forward, step by step, day by day, a testament to quiet endurance, a network of small human decisions that allowed life to continue in what might seem like impossibly harsh conditions. It is a city of shadows and frost, of whispered rumors and whispered hopes, of rationed bread and shared warmth, of children laughing despite hunger, of people finding ways to keep moving when every step is a test, when every breath seems borrowed, when the very concept of survival becomes an art, a careful choreography between despair and stubborn life. And as you listen, perhaps your mind can drift among those snow-covered streets, among those silent, vigilant citizens who kept the city alive against overwhelming odds. Perhaps you can imagine what it was like to see frost on every window, to smell smoke from distant fires, to feel the cold bite through layers, and to hold on to hope as your most precious possession. Where are you listening from right now, I wonder? Is it late at night where you are, or early morning? The world still quiet around you as you let these words carry you through a story that is difficult to imagine yet essential to remember? This is just the beginning, and already you can see the strange, resilient rhythm of life in a city under siege. A rhythm that will unfold in ways both harrowing and quietly astonishing, revealing how ordinary people endure the extraordinary, how a city clings to life even when the world outside seems determined to take it away. The days in Leningrad blended into one another with a peculiar rhythm, a mixture of endurance and improvisation, where each moment carried the weight of survival, but also the faint pulse of human persistence. Streets were lined with buildings whose windows were shattered or boarded up, walls scarred by shells, yet life continued behind those frozen facades. People moved quietly, sometimes in groups, sometimes alone, carrying bundles of wood or sacks of potatoes, treading carefully across icy roads that could crack beneath their weight, reminding them that even the ground was not entirely trustworthy. There were whispers of a bakery that had somehow received flour, and instantly a small crowd gathered, huddled against the wind, forming a line that stretched through narrow lanes, where every face reflected fatigue, hope, and calculation. How much to take, how far to risk walking, how long to wait before frost claimed their fingers entirely. Food was never just nourishment. It was a measure of luck, a currency of human ingenuity, and often a source of moral dilemmas. Some families shared what little they had with neighbors whose members were too weak to leave their apartments, while others hoarded scraps, balancing fear with the survival instinct, aware that tomorrow might be harsher, and even a single extra slice of bread could mean the difference between life and death. Soup kitchens operated under the strain of scarcity, the volunteers moving with methodical precision, ladling thin broth into bowls, distributing bread so ration cards could be honored. The taste was minimal, almost bitter, yet it carried warmth and a reminder that the city had not completely succumbed to despair. In basements and attics, people found unconventional ways to supplement meager rations, boiling potato peels, mixing in small grains found among debris, or brewing teas from dried leaves or herbs, their aroma faint but comforting, and the act itself a small ceremony of survival, a momentary reclaiming of normalcy in a world dominated by absence. Children learned early the art of patience, the quiet endurance required to navigate a world shaped by hunger and cold. They played with what they could find, spinning tops made from scraps of wood, making dolls from fabric remnants, or sliding down icy hills in the courtyards, their laughter surprisingly resilient, echoing across the frozen streets like fragile notes of music. Sometimes, a child would find a lost coin or a bit of candy, and the joy of discovery, brief as it was, became a story retold among friends, a tiny spark of happiness that had the power to illuminate the gray days of siege. Adults watched carefully, balancing the need for work and survival with the need to protect innocence, realizing that maintaining some semblance of childhood was itself an act of defiance against the suffocating weight of circumstance. Daily life also involved constant negotiation with the elements and danger. Fires from stoves were precious, wood gathered painstakingly from abandoned buildings or delivered by the most daring individuals. those who braved both the cold and occasional stray bullets. Clothing was patched endlessly, socks and gloves often turned inside out to extend their life, coats layered upon coats, and hats wrapped tightly around ears. Frostbite was a constant threat, and the first red marks on skin could quickly turn into something more severe if left unchecked. People became adept at improvisation, learning to melt snow for water, to cook meager rations without burning them, and to extract warmth from small gestures. Huddling together, sharing a blanket, or simply holding a hand briefly to remind each other that humanity persisted even under siege. Despite the hardships, culture clung to the city like stubborn ice on the Neva. People read aloud when they could find books, sharing stories and poems to remind themselves of a world beyond hunger and destruction. Music floated through the air when an instrument survived the winter, each note more precious than gold, carrying memory and comfort. Theater and small performances, improvised in apartments or basements, brought laughter and tears, a temporary escape, a reaffirmation that life had meaning beyond the immediate struggle. Even rumors of small victories at the front lines, or the distant promise of supplies, could lift spirits, sparking a cautious optimism that encouraged someone to leave the safety of their shelter to gather essentials, hoping that today would not be as cruel as yesterday. Human connections grew stronger under siege, a network of survival woven through acts both small and extraordinary. Strangers shared bread and warmth, neighbors carried messages for those too weak to leave their apartments, and families depended on intricate knowledge of ration schedules, hidden caches, and improvised traps for scavenging. Stories circulated about people who had managed to survive on almost nothing, their ingenuity extraordinary. Peeling wallpaper to extract starch, melting candle stubs for cooking, or trading rare items in secret networks. The line between despair and resourcefulness blurred, and the city thrummed with quiet acts of heroism, most unnoticed but collectively forming a heartbeat of resilience. In such a city, time itself felt different. The cold slowed movement, the hunger sharpened awareness, and each task, however small, carried immense significance. Even a short walk could become a careful exercise in strategy, avoiding frostbite, ensuring enough energy remained to carry food, and navigating debris-strewn streets. Rumors of approaching reinforcements or supplies could mobilize entire communities, while news of losses sent shockwaves of fear and sorrow. People adapted, their routines measured in survival strategies rather than ordinary schedules. Yet life persisted, stubbornly and quietly, echoing through the snow-covered streets, the dimly lit rooms, and the frost-lined windows of a city that refused to surrender entirely. And so, as the sun barely touched the horizon, casting long, pale shadows across ice and rubble, the people of Leningrad moved through another day, their endurance a quiet testament to human resilience, their small acts of care and ingenuity forming the invisible threads that held the city together when the world outside sought to tear it apart. It was a rhythm of survival unlike any other, a story that was lived moment by moment, bite by bite, step by step, and as you listen, it is possible to feel the cold wind, the careful balance of rationed bread, the muted laughter of children, and the subtle victories that allowed life to persist against almost unimaginable odds, hinting at the depth of courage that ordinary people carry when faced with extraordinary circumstances. The nights in Leningrad were a different kind of trial. Darkness arrived early, swallowing the city in long, silent hours, broken only by the distant crackle of artillery or the soft whistle of wind weaving through shattered rooftops. Inside apartments, families huddled together around the faint warmth of stoves, their faces illuminated by flickering flames, each movement deliberate, conserving heat and energy. Conversations were quiet, voices low, carrying stories from before the siege, memories of ordinary days filled with markets and laughter, of summers when ice was only a memory, of streets alive with bustling crowds rather than the solemn procession of survivors navigating frozen paths. These recollections were not merely nostalgia. They were sustenance, invisible yet vital, a reminder that life existed beyond frostbitten windows and rationed bread. Sometimes the cold pressed so hard that even sleep became an endurance test. People layered themselves under whatever blankets they had, sitting or lying close together, sharing body warmth, whispering small reassurances to one another, or speaking softly of imagined meals, of streets lined with vegetables, of loaves of bread that did not need to be stretched over days. A mother might whisper to her child about distant fields where flowers grew freely, while a father recounted the taste of fresh fish from summer trips to the Neva, weaving fantasies so real in the mind that hunger and frost became momentarily distant companions. And yet, even in these quiet moments, the fear of the next day lingered, the uncertainty of food, of illness, of frostbite, of the fragile structures of buildings giving way under the weight of ice and snow. People found ways to maintain some sense of routine, even if the routines were dictated by survival rather than desire. At dawn, those strong enough would venture out to fetch water from communal pumps, a task that demanded patience as the frost threatened skin and bottles could freeze in minutes. Others worked in factories, where they labored not just for wages but for the city itself, producing essential supplies for both civilians and soldiers, the rhythm of machinery echoing like a heartbeat beneath the ceiling beams. Even mundane chores, like cleaning snow from pathways or repairing broken windows with scraps of wood and cloth, became acts of care for the collective, quiet demonstrations that the city would continue to exist as long as someone kept moving, kept trying, kept believing. Meals were never ordinary. Every morsel carried significance beyond taste. People scavenged creatively, peeling potato skins for soup, extracting nutrients from wilted greens, mixing breadcrumbs with tiny bits of fish or animal fat. In extreme circumstances, people resorted to using unconventional sources for sustenance, from dried lichens collected on rooftops to tiny amounts of horse meat, if available, all rationed meticulously to stretch each bite as long as possible. Baking bread was a ritual, one that sometimes demanded secret flour caches or daring raids for supplies. And when bread emerged from a tiny oven, its aroma, though faint, was almost intoxicating. A brief sensory escape, a promise that life, however tenuous, persisted. Despite the ever-present hunger, laughter sometimes persisted, fragile but indomitable. Children devised games that required nothing but imagination. Racing across icy courtyards, counting cracks in the frozen streets, or whispering fantastical stories to one another as if the world of adults had vanished. Even adults found moments of levity, telling small jokes about absurd trades, about someone managing to barter an old glove for a slice of bread, or gossiping about rumors of distant supplies or victories. Humor became a form of survival, a defense against despair, an invisible shield that kept spirits from breaking entirely. Communities adapted in extraordinary ways. Neighbors exchanged whatever they could spare, a half-baked loaf, a bit of candle wax for cooking, or a small firewood bundle. Secret networks emerged, people moving quietly through the city to deliver supplies to those too weak or too fearful to leave their homes. Even the smallest acts, a shared blanket, a whispered reassurance, a stolen loaf of bread given to a sick child, became monumental gestures of humanity, threads holding together the fragile tapestry of a city under siege. Each action carried immense weight because the margin between survival and tragedy was narrow, often measured in hours or inches. Sometimes, extraordinary ingenuity emerged from desperation. Stories circulated about scavengers who melted snow on stoves to create water, about mothers who brewed tea from dried leaves, about carpenters who repurposed fallen wood into rudimentary stoves. Children learned to make toys from scraps, to entertain themselves in ways that allowed brief escapes from the constant pressure of hunger. People collected rumors like treasures, clinging to whispers of supplies arriving via the ice road, sharing news that might be false but carried hope nonetheless. And hope, in a city encircled by enemy forces and frozen rivers, was often the most precious commodity. And yet, fear and loss were never far away. Illness spread quickly in the cold. Hunger sapped strength. Frostbite claimed fingers and toes, and the wounded or sick often had no one to care for them. The tension between survival and compassion was constant. How much could one spare, when giving a little might save a life but risk one's own? Each decision became a moral and physical balancing act, a testament to the resilience of ordinary people under extraordinary pressure. As darkness approached again, a citywide quiet settled over streets lined with broken buildings, snow-dusted rooftops, and frozen rivers. People retreated to their apartments, to basements, to improvised shelters, each holding on to warmth, both physical and emotional. And in that quiet, even as exhaustion threatened to overcome them, there was an unspoken determination. To endure, to share, to keep moving through the icy days, to live when every moment was an act of courage, to persist in the face of relentless winter and relentless siege. The rhythm of life in Leningrad was neither fast nor glamorous, but it was alive, pulsing quietly in frozen rooms, under ice-covered streets, and through the whispered exchanges that reminded people that humanity, no matter how strained, still endured. Some mornings arrived almost like a cruel trick, the city blanketed in snow that sparkled deceptively under pale sunlight. Yet every step outside felt like pushing against an invisible wall of cold. People had learned to move cautiously, wrapping scarves tight around faces, gloves layered over gloves, shoes stuffed with scraps of fabric to stave off frostbite. Every walk was a negotiation between necessity and danger, collecting firewood from ruined buildings, crossing the frozen Neva to reach a hidden cache, or navigating streets littered with debris from shells and collapsing roofs. And yet, despite the harshness, life persisted in small, almost imperceptible ways. An old woman carrying water might smile at a child sliding down an icy hill, or a young man might stop to help a neighbor lift a heavy bundle of firewood. These small gestures a quiet assertion that humanity had not entirely surrendered to winter or war. The ingenuity required to survive became an unspoken lesson passed between neighbors, between generations, and even among children. Families would melt snow over stoves to create drinking water, carefully rationing every drop, while scraps of vegetables or bits of meat were stretched into broths that barely satisfied hunger but sustained life. Sometimes, a single potato would be shared across an entire family, each member chewing slowly, feeling the warmth of solidarity as well as the physical warmth the food provided. Baking bread was both a ritual and a gamble. Flour was precious, yeast rarer still, and ovens often demanded more fuel than one could spare. Yet the aroma of bread baking, faint but undeniable, could lift spirits like sunlight piercing through storm clouds, reminding everyone that even in siege, life had a rhythm, fragile but persistent. Entertainment became a lifeline, though unconventional by ordinary standards. Children fashioned toys from scraps, spinning tops carved from wood, dolls stitched from torn fabric, miniature sleds from cardboard. In stairwells or basements, they played quietly, careful not to disturb the fragile order of the household. Adults engaged in subtle diversions too, reading aloud from salvaged books, whispering poems, sharing songs from memory, or recounting stories of times before the siege. Even humor, dry and sometimes dark, survived as a balm for frayed nerves. A neighbor might joke about trading a worn mitten for a slice of bread, or gossip about someone's audacious attempt to retrieve firewood from a heavily patrolled street. Laughter, when it came, was brief but intensely precious, a fleeting warmth in a city dominated by cold. Work and survival were intertwined in ways that required constant negotiation. Factories still operated, producing equipment for soldiers and materials for the city, and those working there became pillars of the communal effort. Labor was exhausting, sometimes dangerous, but it offered a sense of purpose, a reason to keep rising before dawn, to trudge through snow-laden streets, to endure hunger and frost for the sake of something larger than oneself. Volunteers cleared debris, shoveled snow, repaired broken windows, and delivered supplies, often at great personal risk. Even the most mundane chores, fetching water, preparing meals, tending fires, became heroic acts in the context of siege. Each decision mattered, A wrong step in a snowdrift, a miscalculation in rationing, or a delay in securing firewood could have severe consequences. Community networks emerged as lifelines. Neighbors shared warmth, food, and advice, teaching each other ways to improvise, to stretch rations, to remain safe. Secret networks circulated rumors of supplies, of possible breakthroughs in the blockade, and sometimes of victories at distant fronts. Whether true or false, these whispers carried hope, and hope, fragile as it was, often meant the difference between inaction and daring. People formed bonds in basements and attics, huddled close together for warmth, sharing not just physical protection, but a collective resilience that made the impossible endurance of the siege conceivable. Rumors and stories traveled quickly, becoming threads that wove a tenuous social fabric. Tales circulated about families who had managed to survive weeks on mere scraps of bread, about neighbors who had risked everything to deliver vital supplies, or about children who found hidden caches of food and shared it with those weaker than themselves. Every story was a lesson, an inspiration, a reminder that even in the bleakest conditions, human creativity and courage persisted. People traded tips, improvised solutions, and small comforts like tea brewed from dried herbs or leaves, or meager broth thickened with leftover grains, which became acts of ingenuity celebrated quietly among friends and family. Despite the severity of life, subtle joys survived. A snowflake on a window might become a source of wonder for a child. The first notes of an improvised melody could brighten a room. A shared laugh in a stairwell might echo long after it faded, giving a brief sense of normalcy. People measured time not in hours, but in moments. The warmth of the fire, the arrival of a familiar neighbor, the fleeting taste of bread, the shared silence that allowed them to remember that life, in all its fragile beauty, still existed. Even in despair, small victories could inspire immense relief. Finding a hidden piece of wood for the stove, spotting a patch of ice that could safely be crossed to gather supplies, discovering a ration left behind. These became mini triumphs, celebrated quietly, but no less fervently. People adapted to scarcity with a combination of resourcefulness and resignation, taking what they could from the environment, from remnants of buildings, from neighbors willing to share, and from the tiniest gestures of kindness. Every action was both practical and moral, a negotiation with circumstance that tested not only the body but the spirit. And as night approached again, the city's silence was heavy but alive with purpose. Families clustered around faint fires, whispering, sharing stories, and planning the next day's essential tasks. Children slept in layered clothing, dreaming perhaps of summers that had vanished, or of days when the streets were full of life rather than frozen desolation. Adults lay awake, calculating rations, recalling rumors, and quietly marveling at the endurance of their neighbors, of their city, of themselves. The rhythm of Leningrad's survival persisted in the frozen hours, a testament to ordinary people navigating extraordinary circumstances. Each breath a delicate act of perseverance, each movement a careful balance between survival and compassion. Morning in Leningrad often arrived with a deceptive quiet, the kind that made the frozen streets appear peaceful, but every step outside reminded people of the dangers layered beneath the snow. Ice cracked unpredictably on the Neva, buildings groaned under the weight of snow and shell damage, and the wind cut through even the thickest clothing. Still, the city moved, slowly but insistently. People went about their routines with a precision born of necessity, every action measured, every breath accounted for. Some ventured out to collect firewood, carefully navigating streets lined with ruins, while others queued for meager rations, exchanging polite nods or whispered greetings that spoke volumes of shared hardship. Even in the coldest weather, the city pulsed with activity, each movement an assertion that life, no matter how strained, persisted. Food, as always, was central to survival, and the scarcity of it shaped everything. People devised countless ways to make something from almost nothing. Potato peels boiled with a bit of fat, thin soups from leftover grains, dried leaves or herbs for tea. Bread remained the most precious commodity, and obtaining it required courage, ingenuity, and patience. Lines formed outside bakeries whenever supplies arrived, and the faces in those lines told stories of fatigue, calculation, and determination. A single loaf might be divided among family members with painstaking care, each bite chewed slowly, each crumb savored. Hunger sharpened senses and stretched patience, yet it also cultivated creativity. Scavenging scraps from abandoned buildings, melting snow for water, finding tiny stores hidden in cellars or behind walls, all became daily acts of both survival and strategy. Children, despite the hardships, discovered ways to carve moments of joy. They constructed toys from bits of wood and cloth, invented games on frozen streets, and whispered stories to one another in stairwells or basements. Their laughter, fragile but persistent, carried through cold air and ruined buildings, a small rebellion against the pervasive harshness of the siege. Parents watched carefully, balancing the need to conserve energy with the desire to protect their children's spirits, understanding that the endurance of youth was itself a delicate achievement, a form of resistance against despair. The cold dictated the rhythm of life more than any clock or schedule. Every task, from gathering water to preparing meals, from repairing clothing to maintaining fires, was tempered by the need to conserve warmth and energy. Frostbite was an ever-present threat, and simple missteps could lead to injury or worse. Layering clothing, sharing body heat, and improvising with blankets or scraps became essential skills. Even small comforts, like a shared cup of weak tea, a brief conversation, or a moment of warmth near a stove, carried immense emotional weight, reminding people that humanity persisted in the midst of relentless winter. Work and survival were intertwined, demanding both physical exertion and mental resilience. Factories operated under grueling conditions, producing uniforms, equipment, and essential materials for soldiers and civilians alike. Those who labored became the lifeblood of the city, their daily endurance sustaining others in ways both obvious and invisible. Volunteers shoveled snow, cleared debris, delivered messages or supplies, and patched broken infrastructure, performing acts that often went unnoticed but were vital to keeping the city functional. Even small gestures, helping a neighbor carry firewood, sharing a portion of bread, assisting someone too weak to fetch water, formed the intricate web of mutual dependence that made survival possible. Rumors and stories spread quickly, becoming more than mere gossip. They were instruments of hope, whispers of food shipments, news from the front, or minor victories lifted spirits and prompted action. Even when false, these stories fueled determination, urging people to brave the cold or risk small dangers for the chance of sustenance. Communities relied on these narratives, each person interpreting them through the lens of necessity, fear, and cautious optimism. Amid the relentless struggle, subtle joys endured. A child might discover a patch of safe ice to play on, or a group of neighbors might share a fleeting moment of laughter over an improbable barter. Music, when it survived, brought light to dim apartments. A piano note, a whispered song, or a small performance in a basement provided fleeting escape. Even humor, dry or sardonic, persisted, cushioning the psyche against the weight of hunger and cold. People told stories of clever trades, shared small jokes about the absurdity of survival, and passed down whispered tales of ingenuity, teaching one another how to stretch meager resources into sustenance and occasional delight. The network of human connections was indispensable. Neighbors exchanged what little they had, from scraps of bread to pieces of firewood, forming fragile but vital networks of support. Secret deliveries and shared knowledge about hidden caches or safer routes across ice became lifelines. Every act of generosity carried significant risk, and yet the collective courage of ordinary people created a city that, while battered and frozen, refused to vanish entirely. The bonds forged in shared struggle were deep, binding people together across generations, apartments, and even entire neighborhoods. Night brought a deep, solemn quiet, but within apartments and basements, life hummed softly. Families clustered near fires, whispering reassurances, planning the next day, and recalling memories of warmer, easier times. Children slept in layered clothing, dreaming of flowers and sunlight, while adults reflected on survival strategies, resources, and the perseverance of those around them. The rhythm of Leningrad under siege was slow and measured, yet persistent. Each breath, each cautious step, each shared morsel of food or warmth was part of an unbroken chain of human resilience, a testament to the enduring spirit of a city that refused to surrender even when the world outside seemed intent on erasing it. As the days dragged on, Leningrad revealed itself not merely as a city under siege, but as a theater of constant adaptation, where every person became a strategist in a struggle for life. The snow-crusted streets were deceptively silent, hiding hazards beneath the frozen surface. Yet they were the arteries through which survival flowed. People carrying water in metal buckets, children delivering messages between apartments, neighbors exchanging scraps of food or wood with careful caution. The city seemed frozen in time, yet within that frozen moment, life surged in subtle, almost invisible ways. A scrap of bread shared between neighbors could mean more than sustenance. It could be a thread of solidarity, a quiet affirmation that humanity persisted despite hunger, cold, and fear. Bread, as ever, remained a symbol, not merely of survival but of negotiation, trust, and morality. People bartered it carefully, sometimes in whispered trades for wood, warmth, or information. Mothers measured each portion for their children with meticulous precision, aware that every crumb could be vital. Soup kitchens operated as hubs of both sustenance and community, the volunteers moving with practiced efficiency, serving thin broth that could warm the body and sustain the spirit. And yet, the aroma of freshly baked bread, rare and fleeting, could ignite hope that carried a person through hours of frost and fatigue. Even the smallest victory, a slice of bread obtained, a hidden cache discovered, a neighbor helped, was magnified into significance far beyond its immediate impact. A small triumph in a landscape dominated by deprivation. Children, resilient and inventive, carved pockets of joy in the harsh reality surrounding them. They fashioned toys from scraps of wood and cloth, played quietly in snow-covered courtyards, and created elaborate stories to entertain themselves and each other. Their laughter, fragile and fleeting, punctuated the monotony of survival, echoing through stairwells and empty streets. Parents watched closely, balancing the necessity of conserving energy with the importance of nurturing the imagination, understanding that sustaining a child's spirit was a subtle act of defiance, a way to preserve the future even in a world that seemed intent on erasing it. Survival demanded creativity and adaptation at every level. People melted snow over stoves for drinking water, brewed tea from dried leaves, and devised methods to stretch meager rations. Clothing was patched endlessly, socks turned inside out, gloves layered to prevent frostbite, coats worn in successive layers. Fires were precious commodities, their warmth not only functional but emotional, providing a locus for family members and neighbors to gather, share news, and maintain some semblance of normalcy. Even a brief moment of warmth could carry immense psychological weight, a reminder that the human spirit remained present even when the body was exhausted. Labor was both an obligation and a form of resistance. Factories continued to function under extreme conditions, producing equipment, clothing, and materials for both civilians and soldiers. The work was grueling, often dangerous, yet it provided a sense of purpose, a reason to rise before dawn, to brave frostbitten streets, to endure hunger and fatigue. Volunteers cleared debris, shoveled snow, and repaired broken infrastructure, performing acts of quiet heroism that ensured the city remained functional. Every movement, from carrying firewood to delivering food, was imbued with meaning, a delicate balance between self-preservation and communal responsibility. Community networks became lifelines. Neighbors shared what they could, whether scraps of food, bits of firewood, or information about hidden caches. Secret exchanges of supplies or messages reinforced bonds of trust, creating a fragile yet vital social fabric. Rumors traveled quickly, whether news of approaching relief, minor victories at the front, or potential food shipments. Even false rumors held value, injecting hope into an otherwise grim routine. These narratives acted as invisible threads, connecting individuals to a larger network of survival, inspiring cautious action and reinforcing the notion that no one endured entirely alone. Despite the relentless hardships, subtle joys endured. A snowflake caught on a mitten, a faint melody from a surviving instrument, or a whispered joke shared between neighbors could briefly lift spirits. Music persisted in small forms. A piano note, a song sung softly, a family humming together, providing fleeting respite from hunger and cold. Humor, often dry or dark, functioned as both comfort and defiance, allowing individuals to momentarily transcend the harshness surrounding them. Stories of ingenuity, trading scraps for necessities, finding hidden supplies, or devising makeshift toys, were retold and cherished, becoming informal lessons in creativity and resilience. Night in Leningrad brought both vulnerability and quiet triumph. Families gathered near fires, huddled together under layered blankets, whispering plans for the next day, sharing memories of warmer times, and marveling at the endurance of their neighbors. Children slept in layered clothing, dreaming perhaps of gardens and summer sunlight, while adults lay awake, calculating rations, recalling rumors, and quietly noting small victories that had kept the household alive. Each day, each breath, each shared morsel was a testament to human resilience, forming a rhythm of survival that, though slow and deliberate, never faltered. And in that slow rhythm, Leningrad persisted, a city of frost, scarcity, and ingenuity, of shared warmth and quiet heroism, where every moment, no matter how small, carried profound significance, and where life continued with fragile, stubborn insistence, refusing to yield entirely to the siege surrounding it. By midwinter, Leningrad had become a city of shadows and whispers, where every window reflected frost instead of light, and every footstep on icy streets was a careful negotiation with danger. People moved with a peculiar grace born of necessity, their bodies wrapped in layers of patched clothing, scarves wound tightly, hands gloved and layered. The wind cut like a blade, carrying the faint scent of smoke from distant fires, mingling with the subtle aroma of soup simmering on weak stoves, reminding everyone that life persisted, even in the harshest conditions. Each movement outside was deliberate, measured, almost ritualistic, whether to collect firewood from ruined buildings, to fetch water from communal pumps, or to retrieve meager rations from a bakery that had somehow received flour. The streets themselves were silent witnesses, frozen in snow, bearing the marks of boots, sleds, and the occasional fallen debris, all testimony to endurance and adaptation. Food remained a central axis around which daily life revolved, dictating schedules, routes, and even relationships. Bread was precious beyond its physical value. It was a social currency, a moral test, and an emotional anchor. Families rationed slices with meticulous care, distributing crumbs like treasures, while neighbors bartered small portions for wood, advice, or information about hidden caches. Soup kitchens provided thin broths that warmed the body and the spirit, while rumors of secret deliveries or brief arrivals of supplies could mobilize entire blocks, even if the rewards were small. People experimented constantly. Potato peelings boiled with whatever fat they could find, dried leaves brewed for weak tea, or leftover grains transformed into thick broths. Each meal, no matter how humble, became a lesson in improvisation, patience, and ingenuity. Children, despite their physical fragility and constant hunger, carved spaces for imagination. They made dolls from scraps of cloth, sleds from cardboard, and games that required nothing more than creativity and laughter. Their voices echoed in stairwells and courtyards, fragile yet persistent, carrying the warmth of life through frozen streets. Parents balanced vigilance with encouragement, understanding that nurturing a child's spirit was itself an act of survival, a quiet rebellion against the suffocating reality of the siege. Even brief moments of joy were celebrated as victories, stories to be retold in quiet whispers that reinforced hope. The cold shaped rhythm in ways both visible and invisible. Every task, from gathering snow for water to lighting stoves with meager fuel, was calculated to conserve energy and minimize risk. Frostbite was omnipresent, and the margin for error was narrow. Clothing was layered, patched, and repurposed endlessly. Blankets were shared among families and neighbors. Hands were held to preserve warmth. Fires were sanctuaries, not merely for heat, but as places to gather, whisper news, share stories, and maintain a fragile sense of normalcy. The smell of smoke, however faint, was a symbol of persistence, of life continuing despite scarcity and danger. Work intertwined with survival, often becoming a form of silent resistance. Factories operated under grueling conditions, producing clothing, equipment, and essential materials. Those who labored became the lifeblood of the city, each movement a deliberate act of endurance. Volunteers cleared snow, repaired buildings, delivered messages, and patched roofs under risk of frost and injury. Even small, seemingly trivial actions, helping carry a bundle of wood, sharing a morsel of food, assisting a sick neighbor, were imbued with extraordinary importance, each one sustaining both individual lives and the collective resilience of the community. Networks of trust became vital. Neighbors exchanged resources, tips, and information about the city's hidden spaces. Rumors traveled swiftly. News of supply convoys, minor victories, or strategic opportunities reached eager ears, often motivating people to risk dangerous journeys in pursuit of sustenance. Even false rumors had power, instilling hope that could energize entire households, driving them to prepare, gather, and endure another day. These informal networks of mutual dependence were often invisible yet crucial, binding people together when formal structures had faltered under siege. Despite the pervasive hardships, moments of joy persisted, however fleeting. Children found snowdrifts to slide down, neighbors shared quiet jokes, and music survived in whispers and fragile notes. A song hummed in a basement, the faint sound of a piano in a ruined apartment, a neighbor singing softly to soothe a child. Humor, often dry or sardonic, functioned as a shield against despair, a small rebellion against the relentless pressure of hunger, frost, and fear. Tales of ingenuity circulated. Clever trades, hidden stashes, improvised toys, and miraculous discoveries became folklore, teaching resilience, resourcefulness, and patience. Nightfall brought a peculiar stillness, yet within apartments and basements life hummed quietly. Families gathered near weak fires, layered under blankets, whispering plans, sharing memories, and quietly marveling at the persistence of neighbors. Children slept in layered clothing, dreaming of a world beyond frozen streets and rationed bread, while adults plotted the next day's survival strategies. Every breath, every cautious step, every shared morsel was part of the rhythm of endurance, a slow but persistent testament to the strength of ordinary people under extraordinary circumstances. And through it all, Leningrad endured, a city frozen in time yet alive in spirit, defined by ingenuity, courage, and the subtle, relentless pulse of humanity that refused to be extinguished, where survival was both a daily challenge and a triumph, and where even the smallest acts, sharing bread, warming a neighbor, telling a story, carried monumental significance in the quiet, frozen theater of a city under siege. The frozen streets of Leningrad often seemed empty at first glance, but each shadow, each faint imprint in the snow, told a story of survival. People moved deliberately, carefully, aware that a slip on ice could mean frostbite or injury, and that every step outside was a negotiation between necessity and danger. Bundled in layered clothing, their faces wrapped in scarves, gloved hands clutching buckets or bundles, They navigated streets littered with debris from collapsed buildings and past crumbling walls scarred by artillery. The wind whistled like a warning, carrying with it the faint aroma of smoke from distant fires, the occasional scent of soup simmering in an apartment, or the subtle tang of iron from old, frozen metal. Life had contracted to a series of essential movements, each one measured, each one significant. Yet within this contraction, there were pulses of creativity, resilience, and unexpected joy. Food remained the central concern around which all activity revolved. Every loaf of bread, every scrap of potato, every tiny bit of fat or dried fish was precious beyond measure, rationed meticulously, and often bartered or shared with neighbors in silent, careful negotiations. Mothers measured crumbs for children with exacting care. Fathers ventured into dangerous areas to obtain meager supplies, and even children were taught to handle small amounts of food as if they were treasures. Soup kitchens operated under constant pressure, their volunteers moving with quiet efficiency to feed as many as possible, often improvising with what little they had. Every meal was an exercise in ingenuity, patience, and moral decision-making, a daily lesson in how to stretch the boundaries of survival into something sustainable. Children, despite constant hunger and exhaustion, found ways to invent small joys. They fashioned dolls from scraps of cloth, created miniature sleds from cardboard, and played quiet games in courtyards or basements. Their laughter, fragile and fleeting, echoed through frozen stairwells and silent streets, infusing otherwise bleak days with warmth. Parents watched closely, encouraging imagination and play whenever possible, understanding that preserving a child's spirit was as vital as preserving their body. Moments of joy, however fleeting, were treasured and recounted as small victories in whispered stories, lessons in hope and resilience. The cold dictated every movement. Tasks that might seem simple outside the siege became exercises in calculation. Melting snow for water, maintaining a meager fire, repairing clothes, navigating icy streets. Frostbite was a constant threat, and misjudging a step or underestimating exposure could have severe consequences. Clothing was layered and patched repeatedly, blankets shared among families, gloves doubled up, and scarves tightly wound. Even a brief moment of warmth, gathered around a stove or sharing a cup of weak tea, carried immense psychological weight, a reminder that human life and spirit persisted despite relentless hardship. Work and communal effort intertwined with survival. Factories continued to function, producing equipment, clothing, and essential materials. Labor was exhausting, often dangerous, but it provided purpose, a reason to rise before dawn, to brave frostbitten streets, to endure hunger. Volunteers shoveled snow, repaired roofs, delivered messages and supplies, and performed countless small acts that preserved the city's structure and spirit. Every movement, carrying firewood, sharing food, assisting a neighbor, became an assertion of both self-preservation and collective resilience, a demonstration that life, even under siege, had meaning and continuity. Networks of trust were indispensable. Neighbors exchanged knowledge, food, wood, and strategies for survival. Rumors traveled swiftly, whether of food shipments, minor victories at the front, or potential sources of hidden supplies. Even false rumors served a purpose, instilling hope that could mobilize people to take risks or prepare for the day ahead. Communities relied on these informal networks, each person interpreting news through the lens of necessity and cautious optimism. These networks, fragile but persistent, held the social fabric together, creating invisible chains of solidarity that sustained the city. Amid relentless hardship, small joys endured. Children found snowdrifts for play, neighbors shared quiet jokes, and music survived in faint notes. A whispered song, a piano in a ruined apartment, or someone humming softly to soothe a child. Humor, often dry or sardonic, functioned as a form of resistance against despair, allowing individuals to momentarily escape the harsh reality. Stories of ingenuity, clever trades, hidden stashes, Improvised toys, miraculous discoveries, circulated and became informal lessons, teaching resilience, resourcefulness, and patience in the midst of scarcity. Nightfall brought a quiet tension, yet life persisted inside apartments and basements. Families huddled near weak fires, whispering plans for the next day, sharing memories of warmer, more ordinary times, marveling at the resilience of neighbors. Children slept in layered clothing, dreaming of open skies and gardens beyond frozen streets, while adults considered rationing strategies, rumors, and small victories that had sustained them through the day. Every breath, every step, every shared morsel contributed to the rhythm of survival, a slow, persistent testament to human determination under extraordinary circumstances. And in this rhythm, Leningrad endured, frozen yet alive, defined by ingenuity, courage, and the subtle, relentless pulse of humanity. Survival was both a challenge and a triumph, and even the smallest acts, sharing bread, providing warmth, telling a story, carried monumental significance in the quiet, frozen theater of a city refusing to surrender to hunger, frost, or fear. The days in Leningrad blurred together under a cold, gray sky, each sunrise bringing both relief and dread. Streets lay silent but for the careful crunch of boots over frozen snow, the distant scraping of a sled carrying firewood, or the faint murmur of neighbors exchanging whispered news. People moved with deliberate precision, every action weighed for risk and reward. Crossing a treacherous stretch of ice to fetch water, navigating collapsed streets to retrieve a hidden stash, or queuing patiently for rations that might be thinner than the day before. Even small gestures, a neighbor offering a scrap of bread, a child sharing a piece of clothing, a brief word of encouragement, took on immense significance, a quiet reinforcement of the fragile social bonds that kept the city alive. Food dictated nearly everything. Bread, when it appeared, was more than sustenance. It was the currency of survival, the anchor of human connection, and a measure of hope. Families measured each crumb carefully, distributing portions with meticulous calculation. Soup kitchens offered thin broths that could warm a body and lift a spirit, and any discovery of hidden caches. A small bag of flour, a handful of potatoes, a forgotten can of meat, was a cause for quiet celebration. People improvised endlessly. Potato peels boiled to extract nutrients, dried leaves brewed as weak tea, or tiny remnants of grains transformed into broths that provided both warmth and a sense of accomplishment. Every meal became a lesson in creativity and resilience, a negotiation between scarcity and survival, between necessity and morality. Children, though physically weakened by hunger and cold, preserved their ingenuity and capacity for play. Dolls were stitched from scraps of fabric, cardboard sleds were constructed for brief rides down icy streets, and small games unfolded in basements and courtyards. Their laughter, though infrequent and fragile, resonated through stairwells and alleys, carrying warmth and life into frozen spaces. Parents encouraged these small bursts of joy, understanding that sustaining a child's spirit was as vital as feeding their body. Each act of play, each shared story or whispered joke, became a quiet assertion of life, a defiance against despair that had crept into every corner of the city. Cold dictated the rhythm of daily existence. Melting snow for water, preparing fires with scarce fuel, patching clothing, and navigating treacherous streets required careful calculation. Frostbite was an omnipresent threat, and even minor missteps could result in severe consequences. Clothing was layered, repaired repeatedly, blankets were shared among families, and warmth was exchanged generously whenever possible. Fires, though small, were sacred spaces, places to gather, share news, and preserve the thin veil of comfort that sustained morale. Even the simplest pleasures, a sip of weak tea, a warm corner near a stove, a whispered story, took on extraordinary significance. Labor intertwined with survival, often in acts that were both practical and symbolic. Factories operated under extreme conditions, producing essential materials for soldiers and civilians alike. Work was exhausting and dangerous, yet it provided a sense of purpose, a reason to rise each morning and brave frost-bitten streets. Volunteers cleared snow, repaired damaged infrastructure, delivered vital messages, and carried firewood, their efforts sustaining both the city's function and its spirit. Every exertion became an assertion of resilience, a statement that even under siege, life persisted. Community networks were crucial to survival. Neighbors shared food, firewood, advice, and strategies for navigating the city safely. Rumors traveled quickly, whether about approaching supplies, minor victories at the front, or clever tactics for finding hidden resources. Even misinformation carried value, offering hope that motivated households to act, conserve, or venture out into the cold. These informal networks, though fragile, formed the invisible web of solidarity that allowed people to endure when formal institutions had faltered under the strain of siege. Amid deprivation, small joys endured. Children played on frozen streets, neighbors exchanged quiet jokes, and music survived in soft notes. A faint piano melody, a whispered song, or a hum to soothe a child. Humor, often dry or sardonic, functioned as both protection and defiance, a subtle assertion of humanity against relentless hardship. Tales of clever trades, hidden stashes, and improvised toys circulated, providing lessons in ingenuity, resilience, and patience. Every small act of kindness, every moment of laughter, became part of a collective strategy to preserve mental endurance and hope. Nightfall brought quiet intensity. Families gathered around weak fires, layered under blankets, whispering plans for the next day, sharing memories of warmer times, and marveling at the perseverance of neighbors. Children slept in layers, dreaming of gardens and sunlight beyond frozen streets, while adults calculated rationing, monitored rumors, and reflected on small victories that had sustained their households. Each breath, each careful step, each shared morsel was a testament to persistence. The rhythm of Leningrad, slow and deliberate, continued, a city frozen yet animated by courage, ingenuity, and the unbroken pulse of humanity. And in this rhythm, Leningrad endured, a city of frost and scarcity, yet vibrant with resilience, defined by ingenuity, courage, and the subtle persistence of human spirit, where survival was both a daily struggle and a quiet triumph, and even the smallest acts, sharing food, providing warmth, telling a story, carried monumental significance in the frozen theater of a city under siege. The mornings in Leningrad carried a peculiar weight, a combination of quiet anticipation and underlying dread. Snow lay thick on the streets, its pristine surface deceptive, hiding uneven ground, shattered cobblestones, and remnants of buildings broken by artillery. People emerged from their apartments wrapped in layers, careful to cover every inch of exposed skin. Gloves doubled, scarves tightly wound, hats pulled low over their ears. Every movement was deliberate, calculated. A trip to the communal water pump, gathering a small bundle of firewood, checking for hidden stores of food in deserted corners. Each step was not merely functional but a careful negotiation with the city itself, which had become both adversary and provider. The wind carried a biting chill, but also the faint, fleeting sense of life. Smoke from distant stoves, simmering broth, even the occasional scent of baking bread from a miraculous delivery at a bakery that had somehow received flour. These small reminders of life's persistence became almost sacred, anchoring people to reality even as scarcity and cold threatened to dominate every thought. Food remained central to survival, dictating schedules, routes, and interactions. Bread, more than sustenance, functioned as currency, trust, and emotional ballast. A single loaf, when divided carefully, could sustain a family for days, each crumb measured and rationed with precision. Soup kitchens, operating under enormous strain, served thin broths that provided warmth and minimal nutrition, yet their presence offered hope. People scavenged creatively, boiling potato peels, extracting nutrients from wilted greens, or using scraps of dried fish. Every meal was an exercise in ingenuity, an attempt to stretch limited resources into something sustainable, a ritual that tested patience, skill, and moral judgment. Sharing even the smallest morsel with a neighbor could be an act of courage, kindness, or survival strategy. Children, despite the constant strain of hunger and cold, preserved spaces for imagination and play. They fashioned dolls from scraps of cloth, sleds from cardboard, and invented games in stairwells, basements, and frozen courtyards. Their laughter, though rare and fragile, echoed through the silent streets, bringing warmth to rooms and hearts alike. Parents monitored these moments carefully, aware that sustaining the spirit of a child was as crucial as feeding their body. Joy, however fleeting, became a quiet act of rebellion, a declaration that even under siege, life and imagination persisted. The cold dictated rhythm, influencing every decision and movement. Tasks that might seem simple elsewhere, melting snow for water, starting a stove with scarce fuel, repairing clothing, were complex undertakings, requiring careful planning and energy conservation. Frostbite loomed constantly, and even brief exposure could result in serious injury. Clothing was patched and layered repeatedly, blankets shared, and body warmth exchanged between family members. Fires were more than functional. They were focal points, providing both warmth and a place for communal gathering, quiet conversation, and the preservation of emotional resilience. Even a cup of weak tea could carry enormous psychological significance, a fleeting anchor of comfort in a frozen world. Work and civic effort were intertwined with survival. Factories continued to operate, producing uniforms, equipment, and essential materials for both civilians and the military. Labor was exhausting, often dangerous, yet provided a sense of purpose, a reason to rise, to brave the cold, and to endure hunger. Volunteers shoveled snow, repaired roofs, delivered messages and vital supplies, performing countless small acts that collectively preserved the city's structure and spirit. Every movement, every exertion, became both a practical necessity and a demonstration of resilience, a statement that life persisted despite extreme hardship. Trust networks became lifelines. Neighbors exchanged knowledge, food, firewood, and survival tips. Rumors, whether true or false, traveled swiftly, inspiring action or hope. News of approaching supplies, minor victories, or clever survival tactics motivated people to risk the bitter cold, stretch rations, or seek out hidden resources. These informal networks were invisible yet vital, holding together the social fabric of a city whose official structures had been disrupted by siege. Amid constant deprivation, small joys endured. Children played in snowdrifts, neighbors shared whispered jokes, and music survived in faint melodies. A soft piano note, a whispered song, or a hum to soothe a child. Humor, often dry or ironic, became a shield against despair, a subtle assertion of human resilience. Stories of clever trades, hidden caches, and improvised toys circulated, providing both entertainment and practical lessons. Every small act of ingenuity or kindness, every moment of laughter, became part of a collective strategy to maintain hope and mental endurance. Nightfall brought quiet tension but also subtle triumphs. Families huddled near weak fires, whispering plans, sharing memories of summer sunlight and gardens, marveling at the endurance of neighbors. Children slept in layered clothing, dreaming of open skies and warmth beyond frozen streets. Adults monitored rations, calculated next-day strategies, and reflected on small victories that had kept households alive. Each breath, each careful movement, each shared morsel was a testament to human persistence. The rhythm of Leningrad, slow and deliberate, carried forward, a city frozen in hardship yet animated by courage, ingenuity, and the unwavering pulse of humanity.